The first call came 7 years ago, right after Dave disappeared. Tonight, like every night since, my phone buzzed with a familiar hum, vibrating on the table beside me. The screen glowed softly in the dim light of the apartment, the number ending in 49. My fingers hesitated, hovering over the phone, though I already knew what awaited me. Silence. That same oppressive silence that had haunted me for years. I answered anyway. Nothing. The quiet stretched between us, heavy and suffocating, like a ghost lingering at the edge of my consciousness. Somewhere, deep inside, I wanted it to be him. I waited, listening, hoping, but, as always, the call ended without a word. I dropped the phone onto the armchair and pressed my palm against my chest, trying to steady my racing heart. 7 years. 7 long years since the day Dave vanished from my life. One moment, he was everything, my future, my world, and the next, he was gone. No explanation, no warning. Just gone. The police closed the case after months of searching. They told me it was time to move on, to accept the truth, that Dave was dead. But how do you move on from someone who feels like they're still right there, lingering in the silence of your life? How do you accept the truth when a small part of you refuses to let go? The phone buzzed again. This time, a text message. I glanced down, my breath catching in my throat. Tomorrow. Be ready. My hand tightened around the phone, knuckles white. I stared at the screen, my mind struggling to comprehend the simple message. Tomorrow? What did that mean? Before I could stop myself, I typed out a reply. Who is this? No answer. I sat there, frozen, the weight of the words pressing down on me. Was this some cruel joke, another faceless message from someone who knew my pain? Or could it be him, Dave, reaching out after all these years? The thought was absurd, but my heart, God, my heart, wanted to believe. Sleep eluded me that night. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my thoughts tangled with memories of Dave. I could still see his crooked smile, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the future we would build together. But the doubts crept in too, the unanswered questions, the rumors that had swirled around him, the secrets he never quite shared. By morning, I had convinced myself it was nothing. Just a random message from a stranger. But as I got dressed for the day, a flicker of unease gnawed at the back of my mind. A whisper telling me something was coming. The business conference should have been the highlight of my career. My designs had finally made it to the international stage, and I had everything to gain. But all I could think about was the message, tomorrow. Be ready. I entered the grand hall, surrounded by professionals eager to network, but my mind was elsewhere, scanning the crowd for a face I hadn't seen in 7 years. It was ridiculous. He wasn't here. He couldn't be. The presentation went off without a hitch, or so I was told. My body was on autopilot, while my mind spiraled, looping through memories and the overwhelming sense of something I couldn't quite explain. Then I saw him. Standing at the back of the room, just beyond the crowd, was Dave. His dark hair was longer, his face more rugged, but it was him. I knew it in the pit of my soul. My heart clenched, refusing to believe what my eyes were seeing. But he was there. Watching me. I froze, breath caught in my throat. My pulse pounded in my ears as I tried to process the impossible. How? How could he be here? I blinked, and before I could move, he turned and walked toward the exit. Without thinking, I followed. The noise of the crowd faded into the background as I pushed through the throng of people, my heels echoing loudly on the polished floor. I burst through the doors into the hallway, frantically searching for him. Gone. Again. My chest heaved, each breath more ragged than the last. Panic swelled inside me. I must have imagined it. I had to have. 7 years of hope and grief twisting together to form a cruel hallucination. But then I felt it. A gaze. His gaze. I turned my head slowly, and there he was. At the far end of the hall, standing in the shadows, watching me. He didn't move, didn't run this time. He just waited. And then he nodded, A simple gesture that sent a shiver down my spine. Come, his nod seemed to say. It's time. The cold fog wrapped around me as I followed Dave through the empty streets, my pulse loud in my ears. I kept my eyes on him, afraid that if I let him slip out of my sight for even a second, he'd vanish again. The mist blurred the outlines of buildings, and the city felt like a ghost town, the distant hum of cars barely cutting through the silence. He didn't look back, not once. Just kept walking, his figure moving like a shadow through the fog. My thoughts spun, each step forward pushing me further from the reality I had clung to for 7 years. What was I doing? The rational part of my mind screamed at me to stop, to turn back, to run. But I couldn't. My feet wouldn't obey. I had waited too long for this moment. We turned down a narrow alley, the walls of the buildings closing in around us, amplifying my growing sense of unease. For a heartbeat, I hesitated, staring into the darkness ahead. He stopped then, as if he could feel my hesitation. Slowly, he turned to face me, and the fog parted just enough for me to see his face. It was him. No question. But there was something different, harder, darker. You're not dead, I whispered, my voice trembling with disbelief. The words felt foreign on my lips, like they belonged to someone else. He shook his head. No. I waited for something more, but his silence stretched between us. The air felt heavier. Why, Dave? My voice cracked under the weight of 7 years of grief, confusion, and anger. Why did you let me believe that? Why did you leave me? He flinched, the smallest movement, but I caught it. His eyes darkened, shadowed with something I couldn't quite read. I didn't have a choice. There's always a choice, I said, my anger flaring. You could have told me. You could have trusted me. He took a slow step toward me, his face illuminated by the weak glow of a distant street lamp. If I had stayed, Belle, they would have come for you. I had to disappear. It was the only way to keep you safe. The word safe felt hollow. Safe from what? I demanded, my voice sharp, cutting through the quiet like glass breaking. His jaw tightened, and he glanced over his shoulder, as if even now, in this hidden alley, someone might be watching. The people I worked for. Before I met you, I got mixed up in some things. Things I wish I could erase. He paused, eyes flickering with regret. When I tried to leave, they didn't let go easily. They threatened me. They threatened you. I stared at him, my mind trying to untangle the knots of what he was saying. So, what? You thought disappearing would make everything better? My voice wavered, a mix of disbelief and fury. Do you have any idea what I went through? The not knowing, the endless nights of wondering if you were alive, if you were dead, if, I stopped, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. And all this time, you were out there. Just watching? He nodded, his gaze dropping to the ground as if he couldn't bear to meet my eyes. The calls. I couldn't speak. It was too dangerous. But I had to hear your voice. I needed to know you were okay. The phone calls. My chest tightened at the thought of those silent, haunting moments that had both comforted and tortured me for so long. You were the one calling me. It wasn't a question, just a quiet realization, like a puzzle piece sliding into place. Yes. His voice was low, filled with remorse. It was the only way I could keep track of you. Make sure they hadn't found you. I stared at him, tears stinging my eyes, anger and sadness warring inside me. Do you know what that did to me? Those calls? The silence? It was like you were haunting me. My voice cracked, and I took a step back, needing space, needing air. His face twisted in pain, but he didn't move closer. I'm sorry, Belle. I am. But everything I did it for you. To protect you. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But after 7 years of heartache and doubt, it wasn't that simple. I crossed my arms, trying to hold myself together, the cold seeping through my skin. What now? I whispered, unsure if I was asking him or myself. He looked down, his jaw tight, as if weighing every word. They're still out there. They'll still come for me. And if they find me, they'll come for you too. A shiver ran through me, cold dread curling in my stomach. The life I had built here, the career, the facade of normalcy, it all felt fragile, like it could crumble in an instant. I can't do this again, Dave, I said, my voice barely audible. I can't go back to waiting, to wondering if you'll vanish again. I've changed. He looked up, his eyes searching mine, pleading. So have I. His voice was thick with emotion. But I can't stay away from you anymore. I've tried, Belle. I've tried to keep my distance, to protect you. But I can't do it. Not anymore. We stood there, the fog swirling around us, the weight of our history pressing down on me like a physical force. I wanted to hate him. I wanted to scream, to demand answers that would make this easier. But all I could feel was the pull of the past, the love that still lingered despite everything. I don't know what to do, I whispered, my voice breaking. He stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, and took my hand. His touch was warm, familiar, and it sent a jolt through me, a reminder of all we once had. We'll figure it out, he said, his voice soft but steady. Together. We'll find a way. I looked into his eyes, searching for the truth, for something to hold on to. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of hope. But underneath that hope, there was fear that this was all too fragile, too dangerous. I nodded, but deep down, I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Love was worth fighting for, but it was never simple. And as I stood there, hand in hand with the man I thought I had lost forever, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The days after our reunion felt like a fever dream, a haze of unanswered questions and restless nights. My life, once orderly and predictable, was now spinning out of control. Work. A distant memory. My designs lay forgotten, swallowed by the chaos that Dave's return had unleashed. We met in secret, hiding from the world, trying to piece together the fragments of a life that no longer fit. The cafe was small, dimly lit, the kind of place no one would look for us. I sipped my coffee, its warmth doing nothing to calm the cold dread pooling in my chest. They've been watching you, Dave said, his voice low, eyes flicking around the room. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. I froze, the cup hovering in midair. Watching me? The words felt foreign, like they couldn't possibly apply to my life. But deep down, I knew. The man sitting across from me, the one I had once loved without question, had dragged me into a world of secrets I didn't understand. That's why I stayed away, he continued. I couldn't lead them to you. But they know now. We don't have much time. The thought of unseen eyes, of someone lurking behind every corner, made my skin crawl. My life, my career, my carefully constructed world, it was all unraveling. We need to leave the city, Dave said, his voice urgent, his hand reaching across the table for mine. Go somewhere they can't find us. I pulled my hand back, shaking my head. I can't just leave, Dave. I've built a life here. My words came out sharper than I intended, but I didn't care. This was my world now, and I wasn't about to let it crumble without a fight. If we stay, they'll find us. And when they do, he stopped, his jaw tightening. It won't end well. I looked away, my breath catching in my throat. I can't walk away from everything I've built, I said, my voice faltering. I've worked too hard to get here. His eyes softened, a shadow of regret crossing his face. I know, Belle. And I'm sorry. I hate that I'm asking this of you. But I can't lose you again. The words struck deep, rekindling emotions I had buried for years. I had lost him. I had grieved, moved on, or tried to. And now, here he was, asking me to throw it all away. The anger, simmering just below the surface, finally boiled over. You don't get to do this, I snapped, pushing back from the table. My hands shook with rage. You don't get to disappear for 7 years and waltz back in, expecting me to drop everything for you. Do you have any idea what I went through? You left me. My voice broke, my chest heaving as the weight of the past years poured out in a torrent. His face fell, guilt etched into every line. I know I hurt you. I thought I was doing the right thing, Belle. I thought I was protecting you. I stood abruptly, grabbing my coat and slinging it over my shoulders. I need time. I need to think. My heart pounded in my chest, and I didn't wait for his response. I couldn't. I turned and pushed through the door into the cold night air. The streets were empty, save for the distant rumble of traffic. Each step felt heavier, the cold biting through my thin coat. I loved Dave. That was undeniable. But I couldn't ignore the years of pain he had left in his wake. Could I trust him again? Could I let go of everything I had worked for? The questions churned in my mind, refusing to settle. 3 days later, the answer came. I returned to my apartment after a long, aimless walk through the city. Something felt off as soon as I reached the door. It was ajar, just slightly, but enough to make my pulse quicken. I hesitated, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling with unease. Slowly, I pushed the door open. The sight that greeted me made my blood run cold. Papers were scattered across the floor, my furniture overturned, drawers pulled open and emptied. My designs, months of work, were torn to shreds, scattered like confetti. But it wasn't the destruction that stopped me dead in my tracks. It was the message scrawled on the wall in red paint, dripping like blood. You can't hide. The world tilted, my vision narrowing as I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a scream. They had been here. They knew. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone, dialing Dave's number with shaking fingers. He answered on the second ring. They've been here, I whispered, my voice barely audible. They know. A silence stretched on the other end, as if he, too, was grappling with the weight of those words. Finally, his voice came through, calm but laced with urgency. Pack a bag. We're leaving tonight. I hung up, the phone slipping from my grasp. My mind spun, panic clawing at the edges of my sanity. This was real. There was no going back. My life, my career, everything I had fought for was slipping away, crumbling into the abyss. I stood there, staring at the wreckage of my life, my gaze lingering on the message. The dread was suffocating, but there was no time for doubt. Dave and I were in this together, for better or for worse. And if we were going to survive, we had to disappear, just like he had, all those years ago. But this time, there would be no second chances. Dave arrived in under an hour, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder and a look in his eyes that told me there was no turning back. No time for questions. No time for regrets. We moved quickly, packing only what we could carry, and slipped into the night like fugitives on the run. The city's glow soon faded behind us, swallowed by the darkness of the countryside. Silence hung heavy in the car, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional whisper of wind against the windows. My thoughts raced, an uncontrollable storm of fear, anger, love, and regret. It felt as if everything was unraveling, every mile taking us farther from the life I knew. But underneath it all was a bone-deep certainty. This was the only way. Dave's past, once a distant shadow, had finally found us, and now it was closing in. There was no escaping it anymore. Where are we going? I finally asked, my voice barely cutting through the tension that had settled between us. Someplace safe, Dave replied, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. A friend of mine has a cabin upstate. We'll lay low there for a while, figure out our next move. A cabin. Remote, isolated. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, but I couldn't summon the strength to argue. Exhaustion weighed down on me, the events of the past few days pressing in like a vice. I had to trust him now. Trust that he could keep me safe, just like he said. Still, as we drove deeper into the night, a gnawing fear gripped my chest. Something felt wrong. The sky was pitch black, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting the world around us in shadows. Every turn of the road felt like it was taking us deeper into some unknown darkness, a place where we might never be found. How do you know it's safe? I asked, unable to stop the question from slipping out. Dave's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I trust him," he said. "I've known him for years. He owes me. No one will find us there." I stared out the window, the landscape rushing by in a blur of trees and empty roads. The silence between us felt like a ticking clock, counting down to something inevitable, something I couldn't name. But what choice did I have? We were already running. Running from a past I didn't understand, from enemies I had never seen, and from a future that felt like it was slipping further out of my grasp with each passing minute. I wanted to believe Dave had everything under control, that he could protect us both. But a small, insistent voice in the back of my mind whispered otherwise. "Are you sure we're not being followed?" I asked, a chill creeping into my voice. Dave glanced in the rearview mirror, his jaw clenched. "I'm sure." I wasn't. Every shadow on the road seemed to shift, every car in the distance felt like it was inching closer. I kept imagining headlights in the rearview mirror, a phantom threat lurking just out of sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And yet, despite the fear, I couldn't help but feel the weight of something else, something heavier. It was the weight of the past 7 years pressing down on me, the unresolved anger and betrayal bubbling just beneath the surface. We hadn't spoken about it since the cafe. Now, as the road stretched on, it all felt impossible. Was this really my life now? Was I really throwing everything away for a man who had left me behind once before? The car jolted slightly as Dave took a sharp turn onto a smaller, narrower road. "We're close," he murmured, breaking the silence. "Just a little farther." I didn't respond, my thoughts drifting to the life I had built, the career, the friends, the future I had carefully constructed out of the ashes of the life Dave had left behind. It was all crumbling now, slipping through my fingers like sand. And I couldn't stop it. As the car wound through the empty countryside, the darkness seemed to thicken, pressing in on us from all sides. I glanced out the window again, feeling a sudden, sharp pang of isolation. The world out here felt different. Colder. Farther away. In the distance, a lone cabin came into view, its windows dark, nestled in the trees like a secret waiting to be uncovered. "We're here," Dave said softly. I looked at him, searching his face for something, reassurance, hope, anything that could anchor me. But all I saw was the same grim determination, the same weight of secrets he refused to share. As we pulled up to the cabin, I felt the unease settle deeper into my bones. We weren't just escaping into the night. We were disappearing into it. And I wasn't sure we'd ever find our way back. The cabin was a humble refuge, cloaked in the dense embrace of the woods. Hidden away from the world, it was the kind of place where no one would think to search for us, not yet, anyway. The isolation was almost tangible, wrapping around us like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The days here passed in a fog of anxiety, each moment stretched thin by the ever-present anticipation of what was to come. We spent our time in this wooden sanctuary, adjusting to our new, unnervingly quiet reality. Every creak of the floorboards, every whisper of the wind outside seemed to amplify our solitude. As the weeks stretched into a semblance of normalcy, a strange and fragile peace began to seep into our lives. By the fire's warm glow one evening, Dave spoke with a resolve that seemed to contrast sharply with our surroundings. "We'll have to start over," he said, the flames dancing in his eyes. "New names, new lives. It won't be easy, but we can do it." I watched him, my heart heavy with the weight of our shattered past and the uncertain future stretching ahead. The fire's warmth did little to dispel the chill that had settled in my bones. Yet, in Dave's gaze, there was a flicker of hope, a tentative belief that maybe, just maybe, we could carve out a new beginning. The life we might build wouldn't match the dreams I had once harbored, but it would be ours. And for now, that had to be enough. We had weathered the storm together, and perhaps, in the wreckage, we could find something worth fighting for. But as the days grew longer and the nights colder, I couldn't ignore the subtle signs of unease. The cabin's isolation brought with it an ever-looming sense of vulnerability. Every rustle in the underbrush or shadow in the corner of my eye seemed to whisper of the danger still lurking outside. One night, as I lay in bed, A faint scratching sound against the window made my heart leap. I strained to hear, my breath catching in my throat. It turned out to be nothing, a stray branch brushing against the glass. But the momentary jolt of fear reminded me that our past was not easily left behind. Dave's presence beside me offered some comfort, yet the shadows of our past remained an omnipresent threat. He had spoken of starting over, but the reality of it felt distant, like a mirage just out of reach. We were safe, for now, but the weight of what lay beyond the trees pressed heavily on me. "We'll make it through this," Dave had said earlier, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a flicker of worry. "Together." As I gazed into the flickering firelight, I tried to believe in his promises. The cabin, though a haven from the storm, was not a fortress against the unknown threats that might still be out there. The future was a blurred horizon, filled with both the potential for a new life and the haunting possibility of past dangers catching up. The night deepened around us, the forest outside standing silent and watchful. And as I closed my eyes, I knew that whatever lay ahead, we would face it together. But the road to a new beginning was fraught with uncertainty, and we would need to be prepared for whatever challenges came our way. For now, though, in the quiet sanctuary of the cabin, we clung to the hope that from the ashes of our past, we might yet build something enduring, something that was truly ours. And that hope, however fragile, was all we had. If you liked this story, please subscribe, like, click the bell, and leave a comment. Thank you in advance.